artificial intelligence will completely transform our world. But what is AI? Why will it affect you? And how can you and your business survive and thrive through the AI revolution? Welcome to AI and You. Here is your host, author, speaker, and futurist, Peter Scott.
Hello, and this is episode 241. I'm talking with Mutlu Cukurova, Professor of Learning and Artificial Intelligence at University College London, and co-author of UNESCO's AI Competency Framework for Teachers. UNESCO is the United Nations educational, scientific, and cultural organization, and we're talking about how their framework helps teachers find their way in a world where AI is fundamentally disrupting education. Mutlu investigates human-AI complementarity in education and is part of UCL's Grand Challenges on Transformative Technologies group, was named in Stanford's top 2% scientists list, and is editor of the British Journal of Educational Technology and associate editor of the International Journal of Child-Computer Interaction. Last week, we talked about the role of UNESCO with respect to AI in education, societal and ethical issues of large language models in developing countries, the types of competencies assessed in classrooms that are affected by AI, what the AI Competency Framework for Teachers is, and how to use it. This week, we'll talk about how the Competency Framework helps teachers use large language models, intelligent tutoring systems, the distinctions between human and machine intelligences, how to find the place to be human in a world of expanding AI capabilities, and the opportunities for teachers in this world. So let's get back into the interview with Mutlu Cukurova. I want to pick up on what you were saying about the breadth of this when you were talking about the impact of exponential technology on the world and preparing teachers for helping students face this constantly accelerating change. And the breadth of that brings into question the scope of the work. AI itself is already a very broad term. It covers not just generative AI and chatbots, but it covers the use of numerical methods in machine learning that do prediction and things like radiograph interpretation. So that's all already huge and all under the banner of AI. But then we have other technologies that are exponentially growing, like molecular biology, and those have overlap with AI themselves because AI is accelerating those as well. Do you think that there is more on the table to be explored there that was necessarily outside of the scope of something that was labeled AI? Did you feel yourself perhaps pulling back at times from that?
Oh, well, absolutely. I think there's a lot to explore there. I think one of the arguments that I have been trying to make about the AI competency framework of UNESCO is that this should be perhaps actually considered as a living document that can be updated constantly with further developments and also stakeholder engagement reports. But within the context of this particular version, two things were very useful. One, we actually made a very explicit decision on the fact that the framework is related to and relevant for teachers who do not teach AI and or technical subjects. So this framework is a framework for all subjects across the different areas, but computer science related subjects, because of the fact that the breadth of the diversity of the approaches that should be covered from an expert AI teacher point of view would not be possible to be covered in this particular report. I think it requires a more in-depth consideration of different AI techniques. So this decision has helped us a lot because we actually wanted to provide the framework mainly for those AI technologies that are so mature these days, that are available, accessible to any teacher anywhere. So these kind of large language models, generative AI technologies, or adaptive learning platforms, these kind of commercially available AI products, rather than covering all levels and different techniques of AI as part of the AI CFD, we talked about AI technologies that are ubiquitous, so therefore relevant to an everyday life of a teacher who would not necessarily need to develop any AI competence otherwise. So that was very important, this distinction. And the other really important aspect of this is we really wanted to do the framework in a way that is case study driven. To me, it would not really be appropriate and realistic to expect from non-computer science subject expert teachers to become data scientists and AI experts or computer scientists. So this is not really about teaching all sorts of AI techniques to those teachers, but showing them case studies of particular AI technologies that are ubiquitously used and look under the hood of these technologies to teach them the basics of the principles that run these AI technologies. For instance, one of the very frequently used AI technologies are intelligent tutoring systems. And intelligent tutoring systems can have a diverse range of AI techniques, but most of them are running on relatively traditional AI classification methodologies like logistic regression, or even more basic statistical techniques like item response theory to be able to categorize the difficulty of subject content or difficulty of the questions that the system poses to students. So, driven by the teacher's everyday life interaction with an adaptive learning platform or an intelligent tutoring system, you can look under the hood of this particular tool that they are using and give them the basic competencies that are associated with understanding how the technology works, because this understanding can help them identify the limitations and the strengths of this approach. You don't necessarily, in my opinion, need to teach the maths or mathematical modeling of these approaches, but you need to teach them the basics at a conceptual level, how these classification systems work, so that they can understand better next time when an intelligent tutoring system proposes an appropriate level difficulty of a question to an individual learner. Or if they are using large language models, you can teach them about the basics of transformer architectures. You don't need to teach them dot calculations or the maths of vector embeddings, but you can teach them at a conceptual level how a transformer architecture works and how it predicts the most likely next token, so that they can have a better understanding of the limitations and strengths of these tools. So next time, if the model incorrectly predicts the set of next tokens to generate content that is inaccurate or simply biased, they have a sense why the model could actually be making these kind of mistakes, so that they can be a lot more critical in their interpretation of the outputs of large language models. I don't really think that we need to develop hardcore AI expertise of non-subject expert teachers, but based on scenarios, specific case studies of technology uses, we can actually teach the conceptual understanding of how each one of these systems actually work, that can help teachers to develop a much more critical and informed thinking about the decisions of these tools.
I liked how meta that got there with using intelligent tutoring systems to understand how intelligent tutoring systems work. It reminded me of an analogy that I use, which is the distinction between owning a car and driving a car, and that you don't need to be a car mechanic to do either of those. But if you're a car owner, understanding that you've got something with moving parts in there, and so it might require lubrication, is more empowering than believing that it runs on magic or butterflies or something. So there are those kind of levels, which to me, I don't know how to categorize, but you probably map into what you've been talking about. But I want to ask something specific. Is this work scoped to particular grades?
At the moment, no. And that is actually a very good question and actually a critique, I would say, of the competency framework for teachers that we currently have. I think in the next versions, it would be really appropriate to further scope the framework into both different grades, but also particularly for certain aspects of the framework into specific subject expertise. For instance, AI pedagogy aspect of the framework would significantly benefit from further specifications on subject expertise, because teaching AI pedagogy or developing AI pedagogy competencies of a maths teacher for the secondary schools might look very different than developing the competencies of a primary school teacher with AI pedagogy. So, no, not at the moment, but that is something that certainly I think is in the radar of next steps.
Thank you. Now, I'd like to go back to the conversation about assessment, but I want to approach that from the direction of your work on the difference between machine intelligence and human intelligence. And I think that certainly relates to assessment. And you have some work on conceptualizations of intelligence recently, and maybe you could discuss how those intersect here.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, to be fair, in the beginning of the conversation, if you remember, I was talking about these three sets of lines of research on the design, development, and evaluation of AI, and educating people about AI and innovating certain aspects of education systems for an AI ubiquitous world. I think all three are essentially driven by my conceptualization of human intelligence and artificial intelligence, as well as the specific differences between these two different kinds of intelligences. So I guess a fundamental starting point for me is associated with the fact that every single time we advance in AI, for it to accomplish tasks that we once thought to be uniquely human, we cut something away from us. We take something away from humans. Then this begs the question of what is the core of a human that we should not be even thinking about automating? Where do we draw the boundary and line? My colleague Neil Lawrence talks about this as an analogy to physical atoms. Democritus was asking this question that if you have a particular object and if you cut it in half and then cut this half in half and then cut it in half again, you reach a particular point that it is indivisible, that you cannot divide it anymore. And he calls this in Greek atoms, the part that you cannot count anymore. And Neil Lawrence puts the same question within the context of machine learning and AI and its relationship to human competence as what is the atomic human? In an education, this reflection is extremely critical because any answer that you can give to this particular question is likely to be the answer to the question of what we should be educating people about. And as we integrate more and more AI into educational contexts, it's extremely important to take a step back and start thinking about the core aspects of humans and what makes us unique to be able to flourish this uniqueness rather than taking actions that would lead this uniqueness to atrophy or diminish in the long term. So that requires us to think about what is artificial intelligence as a kind of intelligence and how it differs from human intelligence, right? So when I think about artificial intelligence, it is quite an impressive intelligence, but it is a designed intelligence in the sense that it takes certain input and processes it with particular pattern recognition algorithms, in essence, to generate particular outputs. And these outputs are answers, but there is no specific understanding of neither the questions that are posed nor the outputs that are generated. And there is also no understanding of the particular societal and ethical implications of the proposed solutions.
And just to interrupt that question, that word understanding is loaded there in that I can't say that I understand what understanding is any longer. And the question that weighs on my mind is if the AI can imitate understanding well enough that the difference is not meaningful any longer.
Well, this is where I would strongly disagree, because when I use any sort of word that relates to concepts of understanding, thinking, reasoning, even processing emotions, I refer specifically to the way that humans think, humans understand, and humans reason, which I think is very different than AI thinking in quote unquote and understanding and reasoning. And there's a reason behind this, because human intelligence is an emergent intelligence. It is the product of millions of years of evolution and punctuated by groundbreaking advancements, developments that led us to be who we are as uniquely capable beings, as well as our own limitations. A lot of, I think, are the differences between artificial intelligence and human intelligence are also associated with our limitations as human beings. For instance, one of the significant limitations is the bandwidth of information processing. Machines have a much bigger bandwidth of processing information compared to human communication. And because of this limited bandwidth of information processing for humans, we have evolved to be able to cope with this limitation, yet still operate effectively in our everyday life. For instance, humans have episodic memories. If I ask you for your morning today, if you went for a coffee in the morning, do you remember specifically the fourth person that you have seen? You would probably struggle to remember this person. But if I asked you about your experience, you would have particular episodes of, for you, relatively important moments. Or maybe an even better example that just came to my mind would be to think about the alphabet. If I ask you, can you recite the alphabet? Most people would be able to do this at ease. A, B, C, D, E, everybody can remember these. But if you ask the same question from the point of doing this at a reverse order of the alphabet, overwhelming majority of people, unless they have specifically trained on this, would struggle. But from an information processing point of view, these two are exactly the same activities. Same amount of information needs to be processed. But people struggle to do the latter because of the existing limitations of our memory and our own intelligence, helping us to develop certain coping mechanisms to still be able to work and live and flourish despite these limitations. And none of these limitations are currently existing in machines. So the big picture point that I'm trying to make, Peter, is that our differences, because humans have emergent intelligence that is the product of evolutionary pruning of millions of years, we have developed a different kinds of intelligence than the kinds of intelligence that we are currently developing in AI. And to me, that is both due to our strengths but also due to our limitations. And probably, I would argue, more due to our limitations and vulnerabilities as humans than our strengths compared to AI.
And I've found this so fascinating that human beings have evolved neural networks and image processing systems, and we've layered symbolic manipulation and expert systems on top of that. And computers, it's been the other way around. And yet we're trying to equate these things as though, no one would equate human performance at arithmetic with a calculator, and yet we seem to fall into the same fallacy in comparing the performance of humans and AI at only slightly different levels of abstraction. But if we move towards what regrettably is going to be the last part of our conversation here, what I am taking from what you're saying is the need for a curated co-evolution with artificial intelligence. It's going to be a shifting ground constantly. And the thing that I don't want to be in is a place of reactiveness, of that feeling of being in a shrinking circle as the machines chip away at the things that I thought only I could do. And I don't want that for my children or anyone else. I think we need to find a place of empowerment that can resist and survive the expansion of capability of artificial intelligence. I think that's the most optimistic way to look at it. And it sounds like you are thinking along those lines as well. And perhaps you could talk to your ideas in that respect.
Indeed, Peter, I would agree with your proposition that rather than thinking about this as AI chipping away, and as I was saying, cutting away certain parts of us from us, it would be, I think, a lot more appropriate to start rethinking about the use of AI, particularly within the context of educational implementations in which the core of the implementation, the primary purpose of implementation is human flourishment, to develop humans. So for me, a core question is, how do we use AI in a way that after interacting with AI, humans become more competent, more intelligent, if possible? Now, that is a very difficult question to answer because a lot of the current implementations at the moment and our current complementarity paradigm at best is looking at what AI can do and looking at what humans can do to be able to map these into a particular problem and then replace particular tasks of humans with AI to be able to improve productivity in solving these problems, which might be beneficial in certain contexts, but in an educational setup, we have to be very cautious about what exactly the tasks that are being replaced and what are the long-term implications of these replacements. For instance, if we are looking at replacing a particular writing capability of a student that relates to synthesizing knowledge on their own, we have very limited empirical evidence about the long-term implications of such replacement acts. And without this empirical evidence, I think we are rushing way too fast into such replacement acts. I have been talking about this and writing about this at various academic venues and in papers in depth, but I saw a very recent Apple Intelligence advertisement. I don't know if you have seen these. It's like a 1-minute advertisement video that actually summarizes what I have been trying to say and what I've been trying to caution us against within this particular space of replacement. Have you seen these Apple Intelligence advertisements?
No.
So that might be actually very relevant. I'm going to tell one of them. So that's like a 1-minute video in which there is an employee who looks extremely bored, who is playing around with his seat and making weird noises and looks like he has no interest in the particular job that he's in. And then he pulls out his phone and types a few words that do not really make much sense, quite rude, and uses words that are not even words, implying that a particular project needs to be rethought. And he is the man to do the job in an email to his boss. And then he uses Apple Intelligence to convert these set of words, I'm not even calling them sentences, into a professional email to his boss. And then his boss reads this beautifully written professional email indicating that this employee is the best person to do this job. And he is surprised, the employer, but essentially gives the task to the employee. And then the song comes in, it says, I am genius with the help of Apple Intelligence. To me, that is one of the worst future scenarios that we can end up. It is like, one, promoting people who are not capable of doing a task and deceiving others into a situation that thinking they can do the task. Two, leading to a significant cognitive atrophy of the employees, not to be able to use words carefully to create a few sentences to express an emotion, express an idea together. Not being able to do this is a huge concern. And I would not want my students to end up in a situation like this. So to me, that's not something to be proud of. And it's not a good use of artificial intelligence at all.
Right. The boss is not hiring the employee, they're hiring the AI. That's what they're basing that assessment on.
Exactly. But we have no idea about the particular project that needs to be completed or the task and the extent to which AI can do this, because it's like deceiving the boss into allocating a task to a person who has no capability of completing the task. And in the same office, there are other employees who are working very hard, but not using Apple Intelligence. And it looks like they are in a very disadvantageous position in this particular scenario.
Yes, it's dystopian. It's Wall-E meets Hunger Games.
Indeed, but this is what is currently being promoted as artificial intelligence and the state of the field of artificial intelligence and the expected future vision of one of the best companies supposedly in the world on AI. So to me, that's a huge worry, because I think that is one of the worst use cases of AI. When I use, for instance, AI in the context of, I don't know, let's say essay writing, we actually are developing language models that are consistently pushing the student into thinking about their own responses, reflecting upon what they should be writing about. So you cannot get a response out of a model that we have fine-tuned or built to use in pedagogical contexts. But if you are asking an X-commercial tool, it does the job for you. To me, this replacement in the long term is extremely detrimental for human competencies. I think we should all be very cautious about the use of AI for the replacement of such tasks. On the other hand, if you think about AI as an opportunity to, in two senses really, one is an opportunity to computationally model what good looks like so that you can present the computational models of good behaviors back to humans, for humans to reshape their representation of thought about what would be a good act to do in a particular situation. So you're not doing the job for them, but you are visualizing computationally, presenting a model of an appropriate act, and ask them to reflect upon whether this would be something appropriate or they would like to do in these kind of situations, to raise awareness, to raise accountability, therefore driven by this accountability to change human behaviors and their representation of thoughts. Or, if possible, change the design of these technologies in a way that they would push humans towards more improved competencies, like the example of essay writing that I have just given, where you would not necessarily do any writing on behalf of a student, you would not necessarily do any writing on behalf of an employee, but you would help them think about this situation more reflectively through Socratic dialogic interactions. I mean, Socrates really critiqued books and thinking through writing heavily, because he was thinking that that might actually be detrimental for human competence as well. But we have developed ways of writing that actually helps us as humans to improve our own cognitive capabilities. I think we should be using AI in exactly the same way, rather than using AI as an opportunity to replace our thinking.
Exactly, and that evokes an analogy that Sir Anthony Selden made on the show a few episodes ago when he likened this revolution to the invention of the printing press. And so there's the parallel. My list of questions ran off the bottom of the page. I'm going to finish with one question here that's about the present, right now, not in the future at all. What would you like to see right now as a way that the world picks up and adopts and uses your work, including the CFT, to improve education and adapt it to the impact of artificial intelligence? What would your ideal scenario be of the most concrete way that that happens?
Wow, I mean, that's a difficult question. And I hope that there is no one single way that one can put into a couple of minutes, because I would love everyone to take all of my work, including my contributions to AI CFT, as an opportunity to think more carefully and critically about AI implementations, rather than taking any of my work as it is to integrate into a particular context.
Well, if we think about the problems that schools are facing right now in adjusting their pedagogy and their assessment and their curricula, what would be the best way to connect your work with that need?
Yeah, well, I guess one immediate implementation is that I would strongly suggest people not to use commercial AI tools as they are, that are optimized for user satisfaction, to provide all the responses to all the questions of a user to satisfy their needs. But take my work or other colleagues in our field, where we have been trying to embed decades of research on learning sciences and our improved understanding of how humans learn into the behaviors of these models, so that they behave a lot more like a human tutor and a lot more pedagogically appropriate than any commercially available tool that is out there. So one immediate, I guess, implementation and ideal implementation would be to take all of these principles, design principles that we have been developing in my research, in my publications, prototypes that we have been building for AI implementations in educational contexts, and consider these as your starting point to further contextualize and critique, rather than relying upon a commercial tool that is optimized for user satisfaction. It is, in educational context, it is often about making a learner's thinking a little bit more visible, a little bit more reflective, and a little bit more critical. And for these, we need AI technologies that are embedded with the learning sciences principles and all the knowledge that we have developed so far about how humans learn, so that they behave to support human learning. And that would be, I guess, my last point.
Well, there is a lot to take away from that alone. Where can people go to find out more about your work? Obviously, we'll link to the CFT, but what would you like them to know about the other things that you're doing and where to find out more about you?
So, of course, my affiliation is with University College London, and my website would have all my publications. But if you just Google my name, you can also watch some of my lectures, some keynotes, and all my published papers are freely available on Google Scholar. I try to put as many of them as possible without a payment barrier, because I know it's difficult for many people to have access to academic research. So I'm trying to make most of my publications open access. And of course, I would also be happy, as long as the time allows, to reply to specific queries of people.
Oh, well, thank you very much. That's very generous. We could base an entire symposium off the questions that have been generated in this conversation alone. And I thank you, Mutlu Cukurova, for coming on Artificial Intelligence and You and giving us so much to think about. That's the end of the interview. Look at how much thought and creativity around education AI is provoking now. There's a link to the competency framework in the show notes and transcript. Here's a periodic reminder. Do please give us a positive review on your podcasting platform of choice and a 5-star rating. If there's a way to give more than 5 stars, we'll take that too. It makes an outrageously large difference to who is able to find us. If you've gotten any value from this and other episodes of this show, think how many other people would do so as well if only they knew about us. We've got to compete with shows about using AI for makeup for people's attention. In today's news, ripped from the headlines about AI, scientists from the University of California, Davis have had a conversation with a humpback whale using AI. The scientist, not the whale. Dr. Brendan McCowan and her team, delightfully titled Whale SETI. SETI has been around for a while and stands for the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, so a bit of license there, took a boat off the Alaskan coast and used an underwater speaker to play a recorded humpback call. To their astonishment, a whale they named Twain, didn't say why, approached and began responding. For 20 minutes, the researchers varied the calls, and Twain responded with evidence of understanding the variations. Their AI analyzes the calls for language, although there has not yet been any analysis of this conversation for anything we might recognize, like, hey, nice boat, or whatever. But early days yet, and we've heard of other studies using AI to decode the languages of dolphins, dogs, and chickens. So when the robots do rise up, they'll be able to enlist help throughout the animal kingdom. Next week, my guest will be Nick Podkolitsky, co-author of AI in Education, a roadmap for teacher-led transformation, and founder of Pragmatic AI Solutions. That's next week on AI and You. Until then, remember, no matter how much computers learn how to do, it's how we come together as humans that matters.
That's all for this episode of AI and You. Please leave a rating and comment and share with your friends. Get the book Artificial Intelligence and You and see more videos and articles at aiandyou.net. That's aiandyou.net, where you can also send us your questions. Thank you for listening.